This a fi we, we da fi ya. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. Come on. This a fi we, we da fi ya. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. I know we should always help we neighbor, especially in time of a natural disaster. But this is not the case with Guatemala, because the poor people will never say a dollar. Only a few rich man will start to get richer. To the Prime Minister be happy, like a letter because
Mr. Politician, we got to change the plans.
God have mercy.
Mr. Politician, we got to change the plans.
This a fi we da fi ya. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. Come now. This a fi we da fi ya. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. Not an inch, not a foot, not a centimeter. We not
Brothers, I'm counting down now.
Guatemala because look what them do to the people of my color. If they speak too loud, sure to get murder. Look what them do to the Indian Maya. Holy for them massacre. Like Mr. President, they care with our because
This is the Sunday review for the Gregorian calendar 2025. I'm Sister YaYa, Marin, Coleman, the producer and host of the only news review talk show that believes on no we like show itself to itself and view itself. That's why I watch XTV. And we're simulcasting on Creme Radio. We're live streaming on Facebook, XTV Belize, and YouTube, XTV Belize. So the tag is still making sense of the news. So we're a big difference for this Gregorian calendar year. And I've been doing this since 2012. Is that we are be very intentional in focusing on the region known as the Caribbean. Now, this is never my brainchild. This is never my idea. But I embrace it because I want, Sunday Review expand and bloom and grow and flourish and so. So I want to introduce with co-host, call when they want. So I don't want to call every Sunday, but he's a big people, so I call when they want. The man now elder did a lot of things for me and I still want more time. That's why I stay though. Anyways, with Breddah from the Twin Islands of Trinidad and Tobago, Breddah Ako Mutota. Welcome, Breddah Ako.
Thank you, Sister YaYa, for inviting me to be part of your program. I'm very happy to be able to share information about the Caribbean. As you rightly put it, we do not know what is happening in our region. And so this is an opportunity for us to share information and to, defy those who want to keep us in a state of perpetual ignorance and division. That's why they don't want us to share information, so we don't know what is happening. So I'm very happy to be part of this, and will do my best to share as much as possible from my own experience in the region and my own home country, Trinidad and Tobago.
Respect. No, but I called the guest last week, Monday, on WB. I'm the host, so I may make sure you know what you can expect this morning. Remember to share this YouTube and Facebook live. And then we guest today, no stranger, he not family. He call regular now. He not on WB, he not on Sunday Review. My brother from Guyana, living in the United States and teaching in the United States. My brother, scholar activist Nigel Westmaas. Morning, brother.
Marin, good day to you and Ako and your audience. Again, it's a big pleasure to be here on a Sunday. It's very cold up here in the U.S. Right now, but the warmth that your station brings will erase that kind of cold, and of course the warmth of the Caribbean in general. And like Brother Ako said, I'm happy to speak on any aspect of the Caribbean that I'm fairly competent on. But also comment on other issues as well.
Thanks. So, for who might never may listen on WB or what's Sunday Review, I want to ask each one on for tell we and leave it both on yourself, and then we can get into one of the first things we need to have a conversation about this morning, the language, and then we can get into some specific news stories from the region where we really need to flesh out because that the impact can have on people in the Caribbean lives. So, Brother Ako, tell me what you want, tell me about yourself.
Oh, about myself. Well, I was born in Trinidad and Tobago, a rural community, southeast, a village on the southeast coast called YaYa, which is an Amerindian name actually. And I, at a very early age, I became active in the revolutionary movement in Trinidad and Tobago. was then called the Black Power Movement. And I spent a number of years there as an activist, very heavily involved in the politics of Trinidad and Tobago, fought general elections as a candidate, and was instrumental in also mobilizing people to participate in various kinds of political activity. I spent possibly close to 20 years in the revolutionary movement, and then I migrated to the US. When I migrated to the US, I opened up a business within a few years of being there. I had several bookstores, African-centered bookstores. The main one was one called the African Spectrum. And those bookstores became hubs for activities in the Caribbean community. At one point in time, we had a hall below the bookstore that will house all the Caribbean parties in Atlanta, where I was. And then I got into publishing. So I've published books. My most recent publication is one on George Weeks, the trade union leader from Trinidad. Previously, I did one on CLR James, published one on CLR James. I am now working on one on the importance of agriculture. And so when I returned to Trinidad after being abroad, I established a school, a primary school that my wife and I ran for a number of years, primary school. Then we also got into the book business, basically doing book fairs and trying to promote literacy, using African-centered books and other kinds of multicultural books. As you all know, Trinidad is a multi-ethnic society. And when we returned to Trinidad, I think in 2006, and we went to the libraries, there were very few books that reflected the demographics of the population. So we went to the library and we had a discussion with senior people there, and we started to promote diversity in literature. So if you go to the libraries in Trinidad now, you will see a lot of different kinds of books, and we were pioneering persons in doing that. And so then we started, I established an institute called the YaYa Institute, which promoted history and heritage. To this effect, we collaborated with other organizations, another one which I formed, and we are in the process right now of putting down historical markers in important historical places in the communities where we reside. And so that's the latest project that we're on. And of course, through our YaYa Institute, we do a lot of online events. We celebrate emancipation, and we do events around International Women's Day and other historical days in Trinidad and Tobago. So, in a nutshell, the activist life continues, right? Despite the fact I'm no longer selling books in the direct way through bookstores, but the activist life continues.
Thanks, Brother Akko. Brother Nigel, tell me about yourself.
Oh, well, again, I was born and grew up in Guyana. Average, normal student life and sports and cricket and the beach. And so I lived near the seawall. And then eventually I gravitated towards the first job as a messenger boy. I then gravitated toward a trade union. And out in trade union, I became, by accident, involved in the Working People's Alliance, the party that eventually Walter Rodney came to join and be part of. And so for most of my life in Guyana was involved in WPA's work between the 1970s and so all the way up to 92 and beyond. So I was inactive there, and I'm still active in a sense in the party, giving it support and publicizing some work and writing in general. But I left for the U.S. to do further my education. I never went back. Formally, I went to University of Guyana in history, and then eventually I did sociology at Binghamton, and now I'm teaching Africana Studies at Hamilton College upstate New York. Like Brother Akko, I'm still involved in solidarity groups, the Congo, Haiti, and of course student groups on campus, whether the Black Latinx Student Union and African Student Union, and of course Caribbean Student Association. But in a nutshell, yes, I'm still active at some level.
Big thanks. If each one of them could tell away, and I'm asking our Master Chief Operator, Black Youth Christy Flowers, to bring up the maps. If you could tell away one little bit about the countries we want to come from, where they're located, the population, the majority population in our country, the size of the country. Yeah, just the basics, so one lot of it could be more familiar.
So you want me to start with Trinidad and Tobago?
You can, Brother Echo.
Well, Trinidad and Tobago, as most would know from the statement, is a twin island state, with Trinidad being the larger island of the two. The population is approximately 1.3 million right now. Trinidad is the furthest island chain south in the Caribbean, furthest one south. We are very close to Venezuela, possibly about maybe the nearest, maybe 10 miles of the Venezuelan coast. It is what, about 1,900, I think, square miles, 5,000 square miles, something like that. I had it here, just hold on. Give you the demographics. The population is highly mixed population. Mainly, right now, the East Indian community is slightly larger than the African community. A number of factors are responsible for that demographic shift, migration, and other factors. So I think the last census, the East Indian population was about 43% and the African was 42 point something. So it's a fraction of a percentage difference, right? In terms of the politics, the politics of Trinidad and Tobago is very similar to Ghana in that it's based parties, right? At least they appeal to ethnic sentiments, even though they have significant amounts of both population, but the narrative is that they appeal to the various ethnic. Trinidad has been an oil producer for very, possibly one of the oldest oil producers in the world. A number of the Trinidadian workers would have gone to Venezuela to even work in the Venezuelan oil industry when it was opening up, also in different parts of Africa. So we have had a long history in the oil industry, having discovered oil very early, even before Saudi Arabia, I believe, if I'm correct. So we are supposed to be very wealthy. The oil industry, while it's still there, the new industry is now gas, right? And we have a significant industrial estate, called the Point Lisas Industrial Estate, which is supposed to be a gas producing center that exports gas to different parts of the world. At one point, I think, was responsible for most of the gas on the east coast of the U.S. in terms of heating for the winter. I don't know if that still holds. However, despite our wealth, we have had problems of crime, problems of poor infrastructure, problems of poverty, right? And we all know this is because of how the whole system, the political and economic system, is organized. And as the world changes and gas and oil become less significant to economics, you are feeling the deterioration of Trinidadian and Tobagonian society, right? Tobago, the other island, is predominantly African, right? And Tobago was at one time an independent of Trinidad, and the British at some point in time brought the two islands together to manage them, and Trinidad and Tobago so has remained that way for over, I think, 100 years. There was at one point in time when there were elements in Tobago who sought independence from Trinidad, right? And that has happened. But so far, the both islands live harmoniously. The Tobago population is integrated into the what we call the unitary state, and so that's where we are as a nation. And possibly we can discuss this further when we get into the meat of the discussion. But in a nutshell, that is what Trinidad and Tobago is.
Thanks, Brother Akko. Brother Nigel, tell me about Guyana. How far Trinidad and Tobago is from Guyana?
It's a 45-minute or 40-minute flight, I guess. Yeah, and I mean, we always had close relations through CARICOM and culture, a language, of course, that you want to talk about. But yes, and of course, the oil industry had some, so, when Eric Williams is in power, Guyanese Prime Minister Forbes Burnham was always trying to suborn him into giving more money to Guyana and things like that. So yeah, as Brother Akko mentioned, Trinidad had long-standing oil going all the way back in the early 20th century, at least, if not earlier. And so it had a lot of influential. Everybody said oil. The famous saying, "Oil don't spoil." Trinidadians used to say that a lot, and so yes, influential. But Guyana, being a bigger in size, 83,000 square miles, is on the coastal thing. I always have the problem when I speak to students and other folks in America when I ask them, I'm from the Caribbean, they say, which island? I say, no, we're actually in the coast. And there are several parts of the Caribbean that are coastal. They're called Caribbean, Belize, and Central America, and other parts as well. And so it's not as a misnomer in American consciousness to say that the Caribbean is only islands, But yes, so we are at 3,000 square miles. You have a population under a million for the greater part of the century. It's not gone to millions as yet. We have a huge, well, not huge, but there's immigration from crisis-ridden countries like Venezuela now, paradoxically, because they have oil as well. Suriname, not so much Suriname, Brazil, and also Cuba. But yes, as Brother Akko says, we are also ethnically divided historically, largely because of the racialization that had to do with slavery. Many African enslaved came to Guyana, or forcibly came, and then eventually when slavery ended in 1838, the British found ways of trying to find new labor, and they went to Madeira, the Portuguese, they went to the Chinese, and then eventually they settled in India. And so by 1911, the Indian population became the dominant population in Guyana, and that has continued all the way up to the present. And so racialized political party system, just like Trinidad, except that we have a different political system, which makes it even more difficult. At least in Trinidad, you have zones where settled political establishments are. Again, we have a PR, proportional representation. So you don't get a sense of representation of communities, you get a representation of the whole country. And that creates problems in another sense too, for ethnic division. But generally speaking, yes, that's Guyana for you. And we're also linked to CARICOM, and now we have oil with Exxon discovering oil off the coast of Guyana. Now every 2 mornings you hear about another oil field, oil and gas. And so it's scheduled to become a very wealthy country, as they say. But as you know, there's Angola, Trinidad and Tobago, Nigeria. Wherever oil has cropped up, you have always had problems. And so I don't assume that Guyana will be any different with the new administration coming in America and all of the authoritarian tendencies emerging throughout the region. I don't see any real manna from heaven coming from the oil industry, although it will significantly change the society. But yes, that's it in Guyana in a nutshell. I'm happy to talk later on about other issues. But of course, Guyana also has Creole, and it has a mixed population as well. So we have Native Americans, and we do have what's called a Douglas population like Trinidad, who are in the kind of in-between, or in-betweenity of the two major racial groups.
That's a new one for me. Douglas?
Yeah, the Dougla is actually it is a Hindu word that is actually a derogatory term to describe mixed race people of Indian and African. But over time, it has become accepted in the society. So the Dougla in Trinidad and in Guyana is a mixture of an African mother and an Indian father, or vice versa, an African father and an Indian woman. And in Trinidad, that is becoming one of the largest demographic groups in the country. Because before it was mainly the Africans, the Indians. You had a small amount of whites, the descendants of the British colonizer who stayed and became localized. And we always had some Venezuelan extracted people, descendants, right? Because we are close to Venezuela. So you find on the southern parts of Trinidad, in places like Siparia, a place called Siparia, and some other places, you would find that there were lots of Venezuelan descendants. These people also became the center for a folk culture we have centered around Parang, which is a Christmas music, right? Venezuela in Venezuela is called paranda in Venezuela, right? It's right, but it's a music of the indigenous, the Africans, and with the Spanish language. So it's called paranda in Venezuela, and in Chile it's called parang. And around Christmas time, that music is played throughout Christmas, right? But to get back to the Dogla, that has become a term that is now used in Trinidad, and it doesn't have the same connotation as
before,
the historical years before, because people are now come to accept that a Dogla is a mixed breed. And I think the Hindu term for it is Dugala, but as usual, we shorten the language, so we say Dogla. But I think the Hindu term is Dogala. Yeah. So,
Thanks to that teaching. Belize have a genre of music called paranda as well, and it's within the Garifuna indigenous African people in Belize. I mean, when we talk about language, because one of my pushback, and Brother Akko used to had organized a conversation in a radio house, radio station in Atlanta called Caribbean Dialogue. And so, anytime I think Caribbean, I think African descendants racialized as black people because we make up the majority of the population. But like two on just done shared, in the countries we want to come from, Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana, the Indian population, and I know even I believe they call the people in East Indian, but I'm very clear that they're not Indian people from India. The slight majority over the African descendants racialized as black people. So when brother, I think about it, and when brother Akko said we need to have a Caribbean dialogue, again, I tend to think black people first. But the conversation as we move forward is really about people in the Caribbean, which is inclusive of all people. And I think I see here somewhere, Brother Walter Rodney said that black in the Caribbean context mean white. So anybody want a white in the Caribbean consider themselves, black. But and so within that framing there, the importance of language, because that's how we talk. Now, the Belize, for example, that are the norm for media personnel. They talk in a Creole all the time. That's not the norm. One number of people that Belize not trained professionally for working at the media. And when I train professionally, well, the dominant language of commerce or the English for if you're colonizer, I'm English. So my position is the people in what I serve, working class people, talk Creole. And so I feel more comfortable talking a Creole than talking a English. And I like code switch. So when I'm amongst Caribbean people, that one way a connection for me that we could talk in our language. And for the most part, and we may have this conversation before the show start, of words that are similar or variations of them, or the Creole proverbs. So I want to get for on a take as people what about they do this work for a period of time. What the honestly the importance of talking if the French colonize you, if that is Portuguese, if that is Spaniards, if that is British, what that is relevance in a 2025 are people from the Caribbean region talking their heart language? When they have reasoning in our public space? First, Brother Nigel.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, historically, I remember when I was at school, the parents, teachers, everybody would warn you to speak proper English. And I never had a consciousness in that early period of, I always thought I speak Creole and with my friends on the road, playing cricket and whatever. But I always knew how to code switch back to English if I'm in parents, family come or some meeting or school. You have to go into English and speak proper English. Like, I remember getting rapped on my knuckles by teachers with the spelling and misspelling a word in English. So it has long been powerfully there in the system. And Brother Akor yourself mentioned earlier that the decolonization of languages took a long time, and now we've made some progress. Richard Alsop, a Guyanese linguist and scholar, we have several in Guyana, including Sister Charlene, who you mentioned, has a whole book on Creolese now, and so it's becoming more acceptable to it. But still, retentions are very strong, whether it's in diplomatic circles, English, formal French, is still there, but it's becoming more acceptable. And I think one of the countries that have the most powerful uh, uh, symptom of keeping the original, like it, Creole, is Haiti. But all of the countries, Jamaica now, I think they're doing a Bible in Creole, or the English Linguist Department are working on a Bible with Creolese. So it's becoming more acceptable, but there's always a fight. And as you mentioned, in Belize, you have this fight, constant struggle to influence you, because people think that you're bad, you're curving your language, you're very bad language if you speak Creole. And of course, Creole is very evolving as well. Words come and go. And I remember some words, I don't even remember them now, that I used when I was a young boy. So it's a very strong thing, but the colonization process is still so powerful. We now have Americanisms in the system that you have a long-standing fight to go against these things. I remember doing history when when Americans invaded Haiti. The first thing that the American general said, "Oh my goodness!" When he heard a Haitian speaking, he said, "What N-word? Speaking French?" He couldn't understand that African people could speak French. So there's an obverse of it as well, that people has the middle class and those anti-colonial fighters so mastered the English language that they outdid the English in a certain way. So the struggle is complex and ongoing in various ways. But Creolese, whether you call it Creole or whatever, it's still a very powerful. It's not a side language. It is essentially a language that people speak on the streets. And if you want to be authentic in a certain way, you have to speak Creole. A politician has to come down to the vernacular in order to make himself feel real. When he speaks, he can't go and speak in Sipari or wherever, and go Rowley or whoever. Got to speak in a certain way to make themselves felt, you know. So yeah, that's my first comment. I have other things to say, but allow Brother Akko to go ahead.
Thanks, Brother
Sister,
Nigel.
I would want to make one comment about the Caribbean, right? And sometimes, and you have alluded to that when we speak of the Caribbean, sometimes we leave bellies out, right? Those of us in what I call the English-speaking southern part of the Caribbean. Also, we leave out Cuba and Puerto Rico, right? And the Dominican Republic, you know? So when we look at the Caribbean, you have parts of the Caribbean that is heavily African populated. And you have parts of the Caribbean that is also mixed, like the mestizos in Puerto Rico and so on. A lot of them are African centered and they try to deny. So you hear somebody like Jennifer Lopez say she's Puerto Rican. What is Puerto Rican? That's a nationality. That's not an ethnicity. But it's a way of undermining their blackness, right? But the Cubans also speak to this in the sense that there is an individual called Malinche. I don't know if people are familiar with it, Malinche. And the Cuban refer to something called Malincheism. And what it is, Malinche was an indigenous woman, I think in Peru or Mexico, I think it was. Mexico, I think it was. Who was the mistress of Cortez, the Spanish conquistadores. And when Cortez came, he realized she could understand Spanish, right? Somehow she came to understand and she could speak the indigenous language. So she became Cortez's mistress. And the offspring of Cortez and Malinche was a guy called Martin, and he became the first mixed breed in the hemisphere, the first mestizo in the hemisphere, right? And so, in some parts of Latin America, Malinche is seen as this figure who created a new ethnic group. And you could look her up. It's Mali. She's called La Malinche, Malinche. You could look it up. She was the one who helped Cortez. And so some people saw her as this figure who created this new mestizo culture, which is what dominates, South America and parts of Central America. But some people also see her as a traitorous figure who betrayed the indigenous people, right? But so this is a reality that we have in the Caribbean, right? This is a reality in terms of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic. And you have very serious resistance. I think one of the most anti-African places in the world is the Dominican Republic, right? I mean, you just have to look at the baseball player, what's his name there, Sammy Sosa.
Yeah. So yeah,
Very dark-skinned African. When you look at him, he look like a European, a Caucasian, right? And so that is a reality that we have to accept in the Caribbean. And it is part of the conflict with Haiti, because Haiti demonstrated an unapologetic blackness. And so there are these two streams of the mestizo culture, right? What is called the Malinchist philosophy, and the blackness of Haiti. And it's something we have not really studied enough in the Caribbean, right? And I'm just throwing this out as part of the conversation, maybe for another point, right? Because you made a statement about the Caribbean, and so I wanted to sort of situate that too in the Caribbean, right? So that's one thing. The other thing about the language, right, which is the question you directly asked. Language is extremely important as it defines who we are, right? And one of the things that all colonizers do is they destroy indigenous languages and make you speak their language. So it is easier because they control you better. Because if you lose connection with yours, and I tell people this, now people ask me why, why I choose an African name. Because when you call a name, and the African tell you, when you call a name, which is in a language, it is not just words and song, but it's also a vibration, right? You call a dog Charlie, the dog doesn't understand English. But when you say Charlie, there's a vibration that goes to that dog that make the dog know you're connected to him, right? So language has more than just communicative purposes, if you understand what I'm saying, right? So when we speak what is called Creole, and Nigel alluded to it, we used to call it broken English, and they rap you, don't speak broken English. You have to speak proper English, right? What we have discovered from the study of our culture, and I think it was Molefe Asante, he used a very interesting term to describe it. He said our African ancestors left us mnemonic markers. And I think a mnemonic marker is a term you use to measure data in computer. When you get a amount of data, you use these mnemonic markers to measure the data. And so he said, our African ancestors, in their wisdom, left us mnemonic markers. This is why we can recreate whole rituals. This is why we can speak language, even though sometimes we won't connect it to the language, because they would have left certain markers for us. And I'll give you an example. We have something in Trinidad called bene, right? Bene, right? It's really sesame seed, okay? But in Ghana, it's the same thing, bene, right? So how did we, you understand what I'm saying? So when you look at language and how we utilize language in the Caribbean, it's clearly, it was an act of resistance, right? And we chose not to speak the King's English or the Queen's English as a way of rebellion, And it is very important that we understand that what we call Creole and broken English, or broken French, as they say in in uh, um, in, in in Haiti, it is rebellion. It is part of rebelling against the system. Okay, and this is why the education system went so much out of the way to make sure that we never understood it. Right now, there was a big debate in the U.S. about Ebonics a few years ago, right? And Ebonics is the same thing in the sense that that was the African American version of resisting the language. Because relatively speaking, in the Caribbean, we were a bit freer. We were left to develop whole languages out of what was called the dominant language system, whether it was French or British, right? And in Trinidad and Tobago, you would find a lot of words that are drawn from indigenous languages, a lot of words from Creole, which is what people call the patois. That's what we call it in Trinidad, the patois. And you go to parts of Trinidad, like a place called Paramin, and people still speak fluently in that language. That whole village speaks fluently in that language. So this is an important aspect of our sociology and our history that we actually need to preserve. Unfortunately, we have discredited this, right, as not being proper, right? As so many, and what is so ironic about this is what we consider proper. I was in a village in Trinidad, and Ella was telling me, he said, could you imagine I was beaten in school to learn that Columbus discovered Trinidad? And now they're telling me Columbus didn't discover Trinidad. But it was the proper thing to teach that. You know what I mean? And so this idea of proper and culture is related to this language. And part of this struggle for liberation is how do we deconstruct these things and reconstruct, right, our own cultural patterns and habits and so on, and normalize it, right? And as you said, normalize it so we can speak both if we want to, you know? And that's what I have to say on that.
Big thanks. We're way past the break time, but I'm going to finish the sharing. We're going to come back and revisit it. We're going to comment from Facebook too. It's 8 minutes after 11. We're going to take one quick break. Going to stay tuned. This is a Sunday review. We have Brother Akko Mutota from Trinidad and Tobago and Brother Nigel Westmaas, originally from Guyana, living in the United States. And this help our make sense of the news.
When you bank your way, it's amazing how much time
know Guatemala. This time me name is Pupa. Believe me, come from the Billy City area. 110% Belize and proud of it, sir. No. Some people only see ya, some see further than that. From my observations, they plan out the what, yes, plan out the what to make me a go pick up the cat, me a go lift enough shot on the militant. Me na go shoot the Indian, me na go shoot the black. Me just lift enough shot on the militant. But me want you carry this message straight to the top. Me here we have a lot of island on the sea, man. Because this a fi we with a fear. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. Come on, this a fi we with a fear. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. This time me name is
and Nigel, and we'll have heights of conversation. I think we did well with having that. We had Krista sent me a question from Facebook. This is our new additive. Thanks to Krista, we're gonna try as much as possible. Can we not talk to ourselves? But we have our audience. The question from Facebook reads: Good morning, YaYa. Is it possible to please question the good gentleman on their views about the Creole language being a true product of enslaved Africans, active/passive resistance and revolt to survive within a system of oppression and maintain their Africanness still? I have anything to say about that question, Brother Nigel, Brother Akko?
Well, Brother Akko mentioned it earlier in his presentation on language that he mentioned the fact that language is a form of resistance, and I would agree that a lot of the Creole that we speak filter down through African descendants historically in response to the enslavers. They speak their own African languages initially, and of course with the dominant language and the dominant force of the plantation, whether Dutch, French, British, whoever, forced even enslaved people to, when the time came, to give testimony in their language. But of course they can't do it because of their own retentions, historical, authentic languages. But over time, after emancipation, you find there's a fusion of English and these language systems from Africa. Brother Akko mentioned a couple of them earlier. But yes, I would say that it is a form of resistance in many forms. It is now taken on in the post-colonial period, a new form of resistance in terms of the decolonization of systems and the acceptance of historical antecedents of language and cultures from Africa, but also elsewhere, because remember, when you're speaking about Creole as well, it also extends to as Brother Akko mentioned, extends to Indians who arrived in Guyana, for example, and Trinidad as indentured laborers, and Jamaica to a small extent, but also in other parts of the region, that you find that there's also, they brought their own language systems with them, and they also reflected the response to the colonial authorities, whether authentic Hindi or whether Hindi is derived into Englishism or whatever, or a blend of the two and became Creole Indian. I remember Brother U.C. Kwana mentioned there's estate Creole, urban Creole, and another kind of Creole, Berbice Creole, and so even regionally you have inflections. But yes, generally speaking, I would agree with the questioner that it is a form of it. Whether or not, though, it's a struggle to retain is another issue, which I think has to be dealt with separately, because there's always an anti-African bias, even among our own people, in relative to the dominant American English cultures or French or whatever. So there's a struggle still to retain your Africanism or your Indian authentic self in the context of a new society, and that struggle continues. So yes, you have the Brother Akko mentioned Ebonics, but there's also other struggles by African-centered groups to retain African colloquial expressions, Creole, and African itself. Anyway, let me stop there because Brother Akko will, of course, pronounce it as well.
Brother Akko, when they have this conversation before the show starts, and one of the things that Brother Akko, and I'll make Brother Akko share after I finish, the connection between African words within the Creole or Creolese language. So yeah, that direct connection. For me, I like to tell people that our language of resistance, our African ancestresses and ancestors, when they get kidnapped, human trafficked, were intelligent human beings with knowledge, with awareness, They talk different languages. Even though European enslavers and colonizers never recognized the humanity, them know they're a human being. And that's why the African spirituality, the African value system, the African names, the African worldview stay with them. And that's why I give so much respect to our African sisters and brothers. The majority, I think, at the time of the Haitian Revolution were from the Congo. And that they had that spiritual sermon. Say, European no got, they can't touch that, they can't control that. And so that's why for me, it really matters. Again, the people in why I work on behalf of I represent, this is how we talk every day. So, what your final 2 cents, brother? Of course, we can wrap up on this language and move on to the media story from December, where refer specifically about Trinidad and Tobago government signing or agreement with the Southern Command of the United States.
Yeah, so yes, CLR James made an important statement in an interview. So I want to answer the question first. The questioner asked if this language is passive and active. Yes, it is passive and active resistance. It is a fact, and they were both active resistance in terms of burning down plantations and so on, and there was passive resistance in terms of, refusing to conform, which is what the language did. But CLR made an important statement. In a question, somebody said to him, somebody was making analysis and they said, well, the Africans lost everything and they had nothing. That's why they responded to him. And CLR James said to him he was wrong. He said, he made this statement. He said, we came with ourselves. So the guy asked him, what do you mean? He said, we came with ourselves. In other words, we came with who we were as Africans, culturally and so on. And that self manifests in different ways, whether it's language. And one of the examples he gave was how within 5 years of some of the Africans landing in Barbados, they were able to run the boilers and so on to make the cane factory, because he said they had a basic knowledge of engineering, right? So they could easily pick these things up, which is not something you don't hear about, that they were running the plantation. They were not just working on the fields, right? So James said, we came with ourselves. So whenever we hear about language, right? So we couldn't speak our mother tongue. So because we had ourselves, we invented something that out of what, right? And it's in music, the same thing with jazz, right? Blues, right? That's an expression. In fact, this language thing is so important. I have some American friends, and they would tell me stories about their grandmother. And they would say their grandmother would one day, one of her grandsons was the first to go to college. And when he was going to college, he went to a mixed school. So he brought his white schoolmate to the house. So the grandmother said, what you do with that peckerwood here? No, don't bring that peckerwood in the house. So peckerwood was a term African Americans used to describe white people. Now, you see what's a peckerwood? It's only woodpecker. You see? Right? But they spoke it in a way that you didn't understand it was derogatory. So, and this language, I mean, I could give you an example. I don't want to hear, but I remember one time when I worked in the oil field. That's why I started working, right? And there was this expatriate who he wanted to be one of the boys. So he used to come and always buy us, the workers, the black workers. So one of the workers said, but he like a mush cocoon. Now, you know what mush cocoon is? A mush cocoon is a little fly that goes around filth. Anyway, see, tutu, the mush cocoon is a little fly. So he said, he's just like a mush cocoon. So the guy thought it was a nice term. So he told his other colleagues, hey, these guys laughed me. They even gave me a name, Mr. Mush Cocoon. until he found out what Mush Cocoon meant and we couldn't use that. So yes, it is because we were just annoyed you know, that he always around us. We don't want you around us. So the guy said, he's just like a mushkukun. He's just bothering you because that mushkukun fly always around. Like if a child want the fly around the butt or a dog, you know, and so on. And so that, and I'm telling you, this has happened maybe like 30 years ago when I worked in the oil field, right? 40 years ago. So yes, the language has always been part of our passive resistance, right? The other point Nigel made, which is very important, that Creole now have Hindu words in it, right? Because when the Indians came, they contributed to that in Trinidad. So the word Dogla is one. But the other was like, for example, in Trinidad, if I go to an Indian community, they will call me Mamu. It means uncle. You know, Mamu means uncle, right? There's a word that has serious political meaning in Trinidad, which is Hindu is kuchor. Kuchur, it means confusion, right?
Oh,
The
that's very
Africans say,
interesting because we say couture in Guyana and it means somebody who tattles on another person. So it's very
right,
strange. I know the same
right.
derivation, but
So
that's
in Trinidad,
interesting.
it means confusion. If you say kuchur, it means you're creating confusion, right?
Okay.
Right? In Trinidad, right, another term, nimakaram, it means an ungrateful person.
I know that word, yes, I know that one.
Right? So those have now become part of the lingua franca in Trinidad. And there's another, and there's a few others like that, you know, Nima Karam, Kuchur, like, okay, somebody referred to I think it's your mother-in-law, your brother-in-law, they said that you're Sarubai, which is a Hindu term for
Yes,
brother-in-law.
yeah,
So these have
yeah.
now become part of of the thing, right? So I just wanted to share that in terms of the language. And the language continue to evolve because the young people now are bringing their own words into it. So, for example, when I returned to Trinidad after many years abroad, I was coming out coming into a main road, and this guy was Russian, and so I had the right of way, so I drove, and he said, "Oh, go man, give me a blind, give me a blind." No, it's a blind. So I'm like, "What is this blind he talking about?" So I go ask my brothers, and then he give me a pass. It's really up to a buy. Give me a buy. You know, but that's the most recent addition to the language. So you hear people saying, "Give me a blind," which means give me a pass. So let me. So and that's a recent addition to this new language that that has continued as the what I call the, if you want to call it, the evolution of our local dialect, if you know, and if you want to call it that, right?
Yeah, and
And
also,
what's
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
go ahead, you go ahead, you go ahead.
No, 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 I was waiting, I interrupted you, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask her what the other thing, what next, what was next. So that's what, but you can
Oh,
speak,
no,
yeah.
no, well, I just wanted to step in and say that also that in Guyana you have the words like kukobe, which means a form of leprosy is Africanism, mati, kwashi, somebody like ku or kwashi, which is synonymous with the word for an idiot. So there are other like Aku was saying, there in Guyana we have all of these little words that came directly from West African language systems and are now used normally in society to attribute something to the other or to discuss some aspect of society.
I'm
Then
enjoying this
one
conversation.
other point, as I said, I just remember another one. You have what is called from the Creole. You have compare and makume. Now, when a child is born, the compare is the male, and the makume is the female, right? That's the Creole. That's the godfather is the compare, and the makume is the godmother. Well, in Trinidad, to describe a man who's effeminate, we call him a makume man because he acts like a woman. So that's not a very good term. Say, yeah, makume man. Yes. Now, when I spoke to Haitians, they understood it because it is. They said the same thing in Haiti. so, so you have all of that as part of the language too. Yeah. So that's all I want to say.
We have to go to break directly, but I want to finish this segment with blight on one word and use the Belize now to as the evolution Creole. But I mean, want to touch upon the Haitian word where you say you use and Brother Pierre say, how you know that word? I think it's important for you at that part of the conversation because I've never heard that before. So if you could add that part and then we'll lock off this segment.
Right now?
Yes, yes, you could add it
Yeah,
now.
well, the word, the same words, Makume, when I told him that, he's like, yeah, we say that and compare. So when I speak to pair, I say compare. Because compare means like a friend, right? And the word we're talking about is salop, and he gave me a story about it. And he said he went to a wedding, right, a Haitian wedding, and he was talking to another Haitian, and he said his son and that person's daughter was talking, but he said his son just refused to learn the Creole. So he's telling the young lady, he just called me salop. I know it's not something good. And she said, my mother says the same thing, I'm salop. So, and when they wanted to scold the children who said they're no good, they say, you salop. And we still say that in Trinidad. I mean, up to today, if you go to any, and young people say it, right? My mother says it. You want to describe one of her grandchildren. Say, he too salop. Meaning he's no good, worthless, he's doing something wrong, you know? And that, so a number of words in speaking with Haitians, when I tell them, what we say, they say, oh yeah, we say the same thing in Haiti, you know? So salop, makume, compare, right? All of those words we use in our Creole in Trinidad are actually Haitian words.
Respect. We have to go to a break because just about 10:30. But when we come back, one of the news stories that we're going to look upon we come out in December is no deployment of U.S. troops or bases in the Caribbean. And then I just find out say Guyana signed a similar agreement back like in 2006 with the U.S. Oh, sorry. It's 11:30. Thanks, Christy. And it live good. And it's at 10:30, like the show just started. It's 11:30. It's time for a second and final break, and then we're gonna get in at the heart of the conversation with Brother Akko and Brother Nigel. Stay tuned. Break time.
Tired of replacing light bulbs?
a fi we, we da fi ya. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. Come on, this a fi we, we da fi ya. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. I know we should always help we neighbor, especially in time of a natural disaster. But this is not the case with Guatemala, because the poor people will never see a dollar, only a few rich man will start to get.
Of Sunday Review with Brother Akko and Brother Nigel. I tell you, them break session just like the show before the show. It's really good. Anyways, we have to look specifically, like I shared earlier, on the news story coming out of Trinidad in December. And it says, what is the story there? Here we go. No deployment of U.S. troops or bases in the Caribbean. Christian show it directly. And then I find out today that Guyana had already signed, there you go, had signed a similar agreement in 2006 with Southern Command. So our allowing two for have one free for all in having this conversation as it relates specifically to Caribbean leaders in these two countries, like our ancestor, Brother Morris Bishop would say, they allow Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana for be playground for the U.S., furthering imperialism, capitalism, and there are two oil-rich countries where the people are not benefit from it, and then there are two republics. So I'm going to talk to about why does they continue, if you want to see any changes happening for people quality of life be more meaningful, why does that happen? Because we know here oil rich, and I think Brother Nigel had mentioned like the country of Nigeria as well. I want to, okay, so the conversation we had behind the scenes just now, we could bring it forward, because I know, I want to say it best.
Nigel, want to go first, though?
Oh, okay. Well, I completely, I think that historically when we look at, I was at Binghamton University, and I don't want to get into the academics of it, but there's a theory called world systems theory, which essentially has a lot of weaknesses because it's done by this guy named Wallerstein. He has Eurocentric positions. But one aspect of it I think it still stands is that we tended to underestimate the global capitalist imperialist economy on a global scale. I'm talking about groups of the labor, left, ordinary working people. We always assume that there's something at the end of the horizon. It is from the 60s and 70s, especially after independence, that we'll have some pattern of change. And I think we underestimated the power of the world capitalist economy and its resilience. I mention this because in all of the cases where oil, in this case oil, has emerged as a product for the people's benefit or found, assume that the people's benefit. Of course, you have to pattern in the fact that most of these oil findings are usually designed and operated and pulled out to the ground or natural gas by companies which are linked to the United States, Britain, France, or whatever. But the point I'm making is that each case of oil finds, except maybe the Middle East with Dubai and Saudi Arabia and so, that there's no sovereign ownership of that product. And you see it in the case of what they call the Dutch disease in Nigeria, Angola, Trinidad and Tobago, some other parts of Africa, wherever oil is being found now. Guyana, as YaYa mentioned, is new, but we'll see how that develops. You always find that there's a pattern of economic exploitation, and the ordinary people don't benefit from it. And these are for many reasons. One of it, of course, is that the power of the companies that come in and decide the economy's priorities, as against, for example, in Guyana, the Working People's Alliance, or specifically Professor Clive Thomas, had proposed a while ago, even before, in 2019, that when oil bonanza is finally decided in Guyana's case, each Guyanese should receive basic income, universal basic income of $5,000 each per household. Now, of course, you can finagle about what it means in terms of household and so, but essentially you were saying that there should be a massive undertaking that makes the oil materially relevant to ordinary people. Now it had pushback. People say, oh, we give people money, poor people money, they spend it out and drink it out. And of course that's not being accurately predicted in where money is being given out. People actually spend it very sensibly. Ordinary people don't spend out their money and drink and so. So anyway, to get back to the point, everywhere you find oil, there's always been a disrepair for the ordinary people, and I link it to the fact that they don't deal with the environment, they don't deal with how the economy is designed to help people. They do it in terms of the fancy hotels. They build hotels rather than build infrastructure for people to move, and of course, food. Brother Akko mentions farming, production of seeds, and developing a whole new horticultural system. They don't do that. What they do is prioritize the big companies, the big white Exxon Mobil and the local counterparts, fancy cars, infrastructure like that, supporting the industry like Exxon and so. So the pattern repeats itself in variations around the world, and so I would say that that's the reality of what oil meant in this case, and to emphasize it, I think it's a pattern of authoritarianism and continuing neocolonialism around the world, which we thought we'd come to a point of fighting, but we still have to fight. Or winning, we now have to fight again and again because it's not gone. It will continue to be in our faces.
Brother Akko, thanks, Brother Nigel.
So the question is why, despite the wealth that these countries have, the people are still poor. And I'll pose a question: why, despite the wealth, the people in the Congo are still poor? Why, despite the wealth, the people in Zambia are still poor? Why, despite Niger producing on uranium, 80% of the people don't have lights, whereas France, who exploits 90% of the people in France, 100% have lights. And it comes down to one point: capitalism. Right? Now, it's a system, and we don't understand it. And I think either you or Nigel alluded to the fact we have to educate people. So it's called capitalism. This is what Michael Manley was trying to educate the Jamaican people about, that this kind of predatory capitalism, right, that exists. And capitalism has always been predatory. And I always find it contradictory that Africans want to be capitalists when we were the tools, we were the currency for capitalism. Our bodies, right, and our labor is what fueled the Industrial Revolution for the world capitalist system. So the fundamental issue is capitalism is a system of economics, right, that guarantees that wealth that is extracted by workers in any form goes to the few at the top. That is, in a nutshell, that's what it is. Now, some people like to use this word market forces and market this and right. Now, the market has nothing to do with capitalism, right? This is a mistake we make all the time. So sometimes if somebody go and open a store, somebody says, oh, you're a capitalist. Somebody open a store doesn't mean you're a capitalist, right? What capitalism is, it's a system of exploitation and appropriation. No, the market has always existed in human history. Wherever human beings have been, right, they have created markets, right? But it didn't mean that the markets were based on exploitation. In most cases, it was based on bartering and exchange. If you go to all African civilization, all the ancient civilization, you will see markets, right? People gather together in a place and they'll bring their goods, whether this one selling milk, this one selling this, whatever artifacts, and they will barter and bargain, right? So markets are part of the human experience. What capitalism has done is to take and monopolize the market so that it serves the interests of the few. Whereas the market was an egalitarian institution that catered to everybody, right? Poorest person to the richest person. It was an egalitarian institution. You had something to sell, you came to the market, and the dynamics of trade and commerce, right, left everyone with something. What capitalism has done is to take away the natural elements of the market and make it into something that serves the few at the top. And that model has now permeated commerce, finance, and everything you can think about, and industry. So industry is now, so the worker is the one who must work at substandard wages in order to make sure that the few at the top who capitalize, right, the new market that has created, right, what I call the non-historical market, capitalize it, right, and they now reap the benefit of this. And that's what so we live in the Caribbean, in Africa, in a world that is dominated by capitalism, one of the most predatory forms of capitalism. Prior to that, it was a more primitive form of capitalism when they had slaves and so on. Now it is a more sophisticated form of capitalism, but it serves the same purpose: the appropriation and the exploitation of wealth from the majority so that that can be transferred to the minority. And they give it names like trickle-down theory. That was Reagan thing, right? Margaret Thatcher, her philosophy was that there is no community, there are only individuals. So they sell certain philosophies to make you accept this version of economics, because it's just a version of economics. But there are other versions of economics besides capitalism. There are a socialist version of economics, right? Okay, there are indigenous methods of economics, like, for example, the susu, right? Which that's a system of economics, right? But it's an indigenous system that is based on socializing everything. So what the capitalists have done is they socialize, right, profits, you understand? And then they exploit, right, the masses and the workers. And so unless and Walter Ronnie spoke about it in how Europe underdeveloped Africa, right? CLRJ, a number of thinkers think about the most recent book, if you could get it, they call it Confessions of an Economic Hitman, right? It's a very interesting book. So we have to educate our people to make them understand that the problem is capitalism. Now, a lot of the so-called nationalists and African-centered people see race, but race is an artificial construct. Race was developed to justify the exploitation. Remember, the first set of slaves in Europe weren't Africans, right? There's a book called How the Irish Became White, because they saw the Irish as black and treated them that way, right? Even this thing going on in Russia, people don't understand it. They see the Slavs as less than, right? You understand? So while race is a factor and we have to deal with it, we have to understand that the real problem is the economics, right? And the system of economics. And race and class and all these alphabetical, BGQ, all of these things are meant to obscure people from the real problem of economic exploitation. So in a nutshell, the reason why we are poor, the system of economics called capitalism. Michael Manley's book called Up the Down Escalator, to some extent, try to explain that whole thing. So it's a system of economics and organization of the economy around capitalist principles that is this fundamental problem. And as Caribbean people, or people in struggle, we have to transform that economic system. We have to, right? And when you transform, and this is one of they said the problems African leaders make. Kwame Nkrumah made the famous statement during independence: seek ye first the political kingdom. Because he said if you got the politics, then you could get the other things right. But you needed to seek both at the same time, the political kingdom and the economic kingdom. So you had the politics, but your economics was still controlled by the people who had controlled it. So capitalism.
That's why the alliance of the Sahel states right now matters. Make I give you an opportunity for getting the final thoughts. If you want to say something about the alliance of the Sahel states in response to changing the geopolitical economic system, so that we could be hopeful.
Yeah, well, I would say that in the terms of responses, I mentioned earlier about the powers that be have crushed a lot of the movements, and you find that all of these countries are bound up in the western and in some cases eastern entrails of capital and things like that. You find that the responses, and of course, the undemocratic rule, environmentalism, the degradation, Lake Chad has shrunk. So you find that in the Sahel, these young leaders, including to some extent Senegal, have emerged now to challenge some of the aspects of French colonialism. That, for example, the French, unlike the other European powers, have forced the former quote-unquote French colonies into a situation of using their French currency, CFA. And so this rebellion is part of that. It's part of the military bases as well that are on the soil of these countries, Niger and Chad and others. And so it's very heartening to see a response, along the lines of Thomas Sankara. But there'll be challenges ahead. The powers that be have all the technology. They have all the powers that they always, the history of the region, our region, as well as around the world, is a history of CIA toppling of leaders, or what Brother Akko mentions in terms of Trinidad and Tobago, Nicaram, those people who betray you. They have them all of the time, Shambi in Congo, Mobutu Sese Seko. So you have to be careful. The youngsters are doing a terrific job of conscientizing the people of those countries to fight against the French colonialism. And France is in crisis itself. But we have to be watchful, be careful, and see how it develops, because not all things are kept at the same level. Remember what happened, the turnbacks of all of those revolutions and things like that. So we have to be watchful. But it's hope. It's very good situation at current.
Brother Nigel, final thoughts, Brother Akko?
Well, I want to one suggestion to Nigel. I know you mentioned Wallerstein in terms of world systems theory. But one of the pioneering figures in that was a Trinidadian scholar called Oliver Cromwell Cox.
Oh yes, yes.
And they have never given him credit.
Yeah, never given credit.
So everybody talk about Wallerstein, but Oliver Cromwell Cox was one of the first persons to talk about world systems theory, right?
Yeah.
So I want to speak about this from a different context. What's happening in the Sahel now? When we did political theory in the revolutionary movement, and we spoke about, and what people don't understand, a revolution is about the acquisition of power, right? The power to transform the society, right? Because the systems that we live in are systems of power, whether the economic, political, and so on. And one of the things we used to discuss a lot, was the ways you can acquire power. You can acquire power through what is called a guerrilla war, like the Cuban model, right? A prolonged guerrilla war, like the Cuban model and the Chinese model, right? Or you can have a mass uprising, like what happened in Iran. It was just a mass uprising, right? And then you can have a coup, right? Now, all of these things, what they do is they take power, right? What happened in Grenada was a coup. The challenge after that is how you make the revolution. And that is my concern with the Sahel. I am heartened by the fact that a new group of people with different ideas are in power. But we cannot get too far ahead of ourselves, because the process of taking power is easy. That's what I'm telling you. You could take power, right, through a mass uprising, right? It's like when they took it in Iran, the Ayatollah had tapes and cassettes, and people just came to the street and just shut the state down peacefully, right? And the Shah had to leave, right? In Grenada, they took it one morning. In Cuba, it was a protracted struggle the thing was trying to use, right? And like in China, and in Haiti, right? 14 or 15 years, if not more, right? So when you acquire power, it is one thing. The next thing is, how do you use that power for transformative purposes? And this is where ideology comes in. What is your ideology? What is your philosophy? Is your philosophy going to be the same capitalist model in terms of the politics, of the economics? Is your organization of the state going to be the same system as the French Assembly or the British parliamentary model? Or is it going to be something different? And that, to me, is the challenge of the Sahel states at this point in time. Now that they have the power, how are they going to utilize them? Now, I'm seeing good signs in Burkina Faso, in which Traore has put in factories, they have nationalized the mill. In Mali, I'm seeing signs, right? What we have to look out for now is the institutional framework that is going to come. And my concern is that because we have been so colonized, right, there is a tendency for us to repeat what we know because we are not comfortable going outside. And this is why I think the Haitians taught us a lesson here, right? In that they reconstructed their own religion in order to guide them as to what kind of system they had. You understand? Because they rejected the Eurocentric view in the world, right? And this to me is the challenge of the Sahel. Am I happy that this has happened? Yes. But I think this too has to do with what has happened. The people, what is happening in Senegal, the people, the young people in particular, have a new consciousness. And this new consciousness is guiding these movements. And these movements and these leaders have to decide what kind of institutional framework they are going to set up, whether they're going to be one-man personality cults, right? Or whether they're going to take the time, the hard work of building institutions to fundamentally transform these states. And that would be my take on that.
Big thanks. It's still a limited time frame. It's 12 o'clock now. But I definitely want to say thank you, Brother Ako Mutota from Trinidad and Tobago as our co-host. Thank our guest, Brother Nigel Westmaas, originally from Guyana. For the time one to take up on a Sunday morning for reason with listeners, viewers, those streaming online, we are sharing in the future. Give thanks. This was exactly what we need. You know, you need something, you don't know you need it sometimes till you get it. It's exactly what the Caribbean region needed. So big thanks. We have to thank our security guard, Brother Delroy Buckner, Master Chief Operator at XTV, Sister Krista Flowers for being so engaging. On a notice Sunday review have one new look. Thanks to Krista Flowers. I tell her what I'm a vision and boom. Turn on the camera this morning and we get it. Definitely thank Larry G downstairs on the second floor on Crumb Radio. The show on repeat at 5:30 this evening on your local channel. Remember, you can always got your convenience to XTV Facebook page, XTV Belize YouTube. You could download the XTV app as well as the Crumb Radio app. And then the theme song is by a Belizean artist, Papa Curly. I have to give thanks to him all the time. And to say we really appreciate the time. And I know with African ancestors and ancestors happy right now because we're connecting as African people across borders, across large bodies of water. I just ask our brothers, to continue to take good care of yourself because we got a lot of work ahead of us to do. And so much thanks again for the time we want to take for share with us. So until next Sunday, people, and I could tell you no, I don't got a guest book for next Sunday. Brother Ako and join me again as co-host, and we have Brother Pierre Labossiere of Haiti Action Committee. Next Sunday, the 12th of January, actually the anniversary of the earthquake in Haiti in 2010. So don't go with guest line up for next Sunday. Until then, honor the people and save the people.
Me come from the Belize City area, 110% Belize and proud of it. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master, talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad love them homeland will never give it up to another nation. Them country bad love them homeland will never give it up to another nation. This is the we we the fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This is the we we the fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This time me name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area, 110% Belize and proud of it. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master, talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad love them homeland will never give it up to another nation. Them country bad love them homeland will never give it up to another nation. This is the we the fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala.